And now it's time for Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.
Welcome to another session of Talking Trade. I'm Ken Wasylik, Managing Director of E.M. Wasylik and Associates, a international business development company.
And I'm Sandi Siegel, President of M.E. Day and Company. We have a returning guest today. Welcome to Chris Wojtowicz, International Trade Consultant at Wisconsin Small Business Development Corp. And Chairman of the Wisconsin DEC. So thank you, Chris, for joining us again today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate these opportunities.
So, so appreciate the work you do here in Wisconsin and working, with small and medium-sized businesses and new startups and so forth, and a great resource for companies in the state. I think we could all agree we're in a rather uncertain trade environment, and, typically we're looking at export as a way of growing businesses and a strategy for small and medium-sized businesses in the strategy plan. How do you view that today in today's uncertain climate and given the risk factor and the uncertainty of the world of trade, and how are you advising the clients?
You're absolutely right, Sandy. It's that it is kind of difficult, but I personally I stay positive and I tell my clients to do the same. The world's not falling or coming to an end. There are a lot of opportunities to be found out there. And at the end of the day, we are all just people. And I tell my clients that their potential or prospective customers overseas are looking for your solution. Politics and governments and personalities and rhetoric aside, people are still looking for your solution. So let's lead with that. And I've found a lot of my clients are like, yeah, that's a real refreshing way to view this, and we can move forward. It's just that.
Yeah. Well, that's really good advice there, Chris, because I know relationships that are formed over long term or even short term, somehow navigate any obstacles that come in, that politics, economics, microeconomics that actually. And you work directly with the exporters, the small, medium-sized exporters. Do you have any examples of success stories in this, how would I say, uncertain or not difficult, but confusing climate? But there's real success stories that are here. Got a couple of examples for us?
Ken, I have a great one. I met with a company about 2 weeks ago, and she had called me up. Oh God, the world was coming to an end. I've got my product out on the water. It's going to be 174% tariffs and all this bad gloom and doom stuff from China, right? I mean, it was going to be horrible. And I said, okay, well, let's unpack this for a minute. Let's talk about this gloom and doom, this horror movie that you found yourself in the middle of. And as it turns out, I said, step away from your TV and your rhetoric and look at your personal situation. Here you have product that's coming in that's subject to these Chinese tariffs and duties. You have a customer of yours is a big box retailer here in Wisconsin, and they were willing to eat some of that tariff. They realized that they were going to have to pay for it. They really liked this lady's products, and they were willing to do something for her. And then she had said at the same time, well, Chris, I want to expand my business just beyond that one big box retailer in Wisconsin, but I don't know how. So as it turns out, and as it turns out, she had an order that was on a 20-foot container. And I don't recall the number of units. So let's just say it was 100,000 units that filled a 20-foot container. And I said, did you realize that a 20-foot container's price to ship, right? The shipping charges are about 85% of a 40-footer. So if you were to pay another 15%, you would have 200,000 units. You have, you could take these savings and apply them to, your, tariffs that you may,
Offset, sure.
yeah.
Yeah, offset. Yeah, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, here's that offset. And then all of a sudden she's like, wow, it was like something just opened up. And then we got into talking about, things like duty drawback and bonded warehousing and these interim duty mitigation strategies. I know that's a pretty big word, but that's what it is.
Hmm.
And then I told her, I says, you get into a situation where you re-export your product. Well, if you don't have to pay those duties and taxes if it's re-exported through let's say a bonded warehouse or what have you. And I said, or otherwise, there are, like duty drawback, for example. And it was just amazing. She had just brightened right up like I'd, and I was, it was something simple to me, but she was excited about it.
Yeah, well, these tariffs on the imports really affect exporters as well because the product is manufactured and assembled here in the US. And then, of course, you have the re-export. You talked about the duty drawbacks. I know my clients are investigating free trade zones on a I've never had this much activity on the free trade zones as I have over the last 45 days. Where are there free trade zones and alike? So from an exporter's point of view, how does your clientele on the exporting side, navigate these waters today?
That's a really great question as well, Ken, because again, we have the import side, we're going to have to pay the, tariffs, but on the export side, for example, Canada's, they're still charging us 25% of a retaliatory tariff, even though we're not charging them. And with the Trump administration's alienation of some of the folks up in Canada, there's quite a bit of pushback and attitude, right? So I talked to one of my clients. And, again, she said, I've totally been shut out of the Canadian market. I can't sell any of my goods. And I said, well, why? Well, because of, they're American goods. And I said, well, are they? So let's take a look at this. So country of origin, as we know, is a key factor alongside your harmonized code in determining what duties and taxes or retaliatory tariffs are going to be made. Well, lo and behold, for her, she was importing products from China. She was making products here in the United States. And I told her, I says, your Chinese products don't, just automatically turn into products of the United States without some sort of,
That's substantial
Yeah,
transformation.
some
yeah,
transformation.
right.
And this is so when you export those from the United States to Canada, they're still products of China and they're not subject to any retaliatory tariffs. Once again, the light bulb goes off and she's like, well, that'll save me for a good chunk of my business. Now, of course, the stuff that she manufactures in the United States, it goes through that substantial transformation and the Chinese parts, basically kind of, lose their identity. So that might not help her. But again, it's a case by case basis, and
Sure.
There's opportunities, right?
Yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah.
yes, and likewise, yeah, there are carve outs, but I'll just say it's very fluid, as you both
Yes.
know. And we too are, never had so much conversations about drawback and bonded warehouses and so forth. But there is, I know we've seen it as well, and I'm interested how much you've seen it on, there is, until we just had the recent pause with China on both sides. I, just talked to someone in the lumber industry who had, when, all the trade wars started with China, had goods he couldn't stop, were on their way to China. The order was canceled and he had to pay to bring the goods back to the US and did. And now that the tariffs are paused going into China, he is shipping literally the same product outbound again. And we've had some of the same dynamics on imports. So it's the speed at which some of this is happening that makes it very difficult. But when you talk about Canada, don't forget we are still charging Canada the fentanyl, the original IEEPA duties. So but there are carve outs, and there are a lot of carve outs for any production or inputs of US goods, and certainly, when you get into the auto industry. So, there are a lot of nuances, a lot of subtle nuances, but I guess it gets back to, right, how do all of us counsel our, whether, imports and exporters in these uncertain times? We're in a pause period, with our European, trade partners, our key trade partners, including China, and Canada and Mexico. And, as soon as we turn the switch back on, if we haven't negotiated a trade deal, those retaliatory tariffs, on outbound are going to happen again. So, how are you counseling exporters, get it out as soon as you can? I mean, it's really a hard
Right.
thing to plan for.
We're in that situation right now, Sandy, especially with your company. You have your customs entry writers probably pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
And now you have, with this pause, you probably have your importers and your exporters, trying to ship as fast as they possibly can, because who knows what tomorrow may bring, right? In 2016, in that area, we called it international trade by the tweet. I don't know what we can call it today. But as we found out the morning that you're taping this, we have Apple. And we have I said Apple, and we have a potential tariff now on the EU. So I tell my clients, and as I told them back then, take this, take this rhetoric, not as gospel, but be prepared for it, because he's giving you, the administration is giving you, they're inkling to you what their next move is going to be.
Yes,
So,
right.
does that mean ship now, get stuff on the water and panic? No, but be prepared. That's what it means. And it's difficult. It really is. I'm trying to tell my clients to be proactive rather than reactive. But like you said, with the speed of these decisions that are being made, that is the difficult.
Difficult. It's very difficult. But I like where you started in that the sky is not falling, the world is not ending. I'm a firm believer that yes, trade will continue, and we just, need to stay informed. And we've been saying it for a long time, since before COVID, and certainly, past that, and the supply chain meltdown, is keep your supply chains fluid and, adaptable. And and more than anything, I'm telling my customers, stay updated, however you do that through all our various trade resources, and,
Have
and stay versatile.
Have
So,
that second supplier, have that third supplier in a different country. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I understand it boils down to a lot of quality issues and speed and timing and
Nice.
all these different extraneous things, but it's,
Yes.
it's having those relationships already cultivated so that if you need to pivot in your supply chain, you're doing
You
it.
can,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah. Well, I
And
also want to mention, Chris, you're the chairman of the Wisconsin District Export Council, and the export councils have a number of trade compliance and trade supply chain experts that we can tap into as well. They're facing everything that we just talked about, but again, this is a resource, another resource for exporters as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, we've got some great resources in Wisconsin, including all of us, and we're all in it together. That's what I keep reminding everybody. So, Chris, thanks again for all the work you do, and thanks for joining us again on Talking Trade.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sandy.
Chris.
Thank you, Ken.
You've been listening to Talking Trade with Sandi Siegel and Ken Wasylik, sponsored by the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity, Michael Best Strategies, and Carroll University.